Has anybody ever felt like the woman in this picture when trying to make changes to a recipe for heart health? If that's you, or you feel like you're like that inside, today's class is for you. What I want to make sure we start with, though, is the reminder that when it comes to modifying recipes for heart health, we need to take some certain considerations in mind. First of all, it's not wise to simply go around slashing or cutting out ingredients because we've heard or we know they're not good for us. For example, we know we need to be mindful of fat or the types of fat we consume, but does that mean I can just go in and eliminate the fat from all my recipes? Or the idea of sugar, wanting to limit those added sugars, so I'll just go ahead and leave the sugar out of my cookies. Well, here's the thing, besides just taste, our ingredients are going to serve additional purposes, and eliminating them can possibly cause other effects that create issues with texture or consistency, obviously the flavor, but overall the finished product's integrity. So what about a reduction? Using fat or sugar as our examples, could I go through and limit the amount of fat that I'm using or reduce the amount of sugar? But if so, by how much? Is there an appropriate substitution I could make instead? Or am I looking at this all wrong? These first three topics all deal with the idea of subtraction. What about addition? Is there something I could add to this recipe to increase its nutrition? And the final consideration is perhaps more related to cooking technique rather than ingredients used. I think most of us would agree that deep frying would be substantially less healthy than baking, but a piece of baked chicken tastes nothing like a piece of deep fried chicken. So how do I get there? What does it look like if I change that cooking technique from frying to baking? What other alterations do I need to make so that the finished product is good, is something I feel happy serving, and is still good for me? When it comes to heart health, the recommendations we keep in the back of our mind are as follows. Now, these numbers, based on 1,500 calories or 2,000 calories, are from American Heart Association, and they're different percentages that for the calorie levels reflect a general recommendation for women at 1,500 calories and a general recommendation for men based on 2,000 calories a day. But please note that it is important that we standardize or individualize, these recommendations accordingly to your own needs. Now, that being said, the numbers in these columns can at least give you an idea of where we start. So how do we get there? When it comes to cooking at home or baking at home, what are some of the swaps or substitutions we could make that help us stay on target? We're going to take a look at certain ingredients that would contribute the most when it comes to saturated fat or trans fat or sugar or sodium, and try to find ways to stay closer to our recommendations. So as you can see on this page here, instead of the ingredients listed in the left-hand column of the screen, we're looking for alternatives listed in the right. Now, it's not as simple as saying, okay, if I planned to use butter in baking, I'll simply switch to nonstick spray in baking. Well, obviously that's not going to work. You're not going to fill up a 1-cup measuring cup with nonstick spray. But the idea is, depending on how we're using some of these ingredients, there may be alternatives out there. So for example, butter in baking can be replaced, believe it or not, with a liquid oil like canola. I do not recommend olive oil as a replacement in baking, but canola oil, which is substantially less saturated fat. Now, if you want to use that, I do recommend reducing the amount by about 1/4. So for example, if your cookie recipe calls for a cup of butter, 2 sticks, like most cookie recipes do, you could substitute those 2 sticks of butter for 3/4 of a cup canola oil. You could also use a fruit puree like applesauce or pumpkin in place of some of the butter. You can replace all of it. However, it will change the texture of your finished product and give you more of a cakey finished good than maybe what you would expect. So typically, if I'm going to be replacing the butter in a recipe, especially if I've never tried a substitution in that recipe before, I usually only go half and half. So maybe it's 1 stick of butter and a half a cup of applesauce in that cookie or bar recipe. If you're using margarine or butter or coconut oil to pan saute something, a nonstick spray, a liquid oil like olive oil, or a tub of margarine would be an appropriate replacement. The rest of the ingredients on this page, they deal with more of our meat-based products. We know that animal products are going to be our highest contributors of saturated fat in the diet. So as you can see here, it doesn't mean you have to be animal-free or completely plant-based. Then in the column of try this, they're all still animal products, they're just leaner. Now in that last one, the poultry, white skinless chicken obviously tastes different than dark meat with the skin on, but that comes down to a cooking technique that may require some alterations to say, you know what, I bet if I breaded that chicken in something different, not traditional batter and certainly not deep frying it, all of a sudden that white chicken breast might actually taste somewhat decent compared to my original version of fried chicken. Regardless of what substitutions you make, knowing that your options in the right-hand column of this screen are going to provide less saturated fat will hopefully give you the encouragement you need that you're staying closer to the recommendations we just talked about. Here's a few additional ingredients that would otherwise be very high or dense in saturated fat, again listed on the left-hand side of the screen, with replacements here on the right. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want to touch on just a couple, sour cream being one of them. A great replacement for sour cream, both in baking as well as a topping for baked potatoes or tacos, for example, would be plain, non-fat Greek yogurt. Make sure you buy the plain, however. Vanilla non-fat Greek yogurt does not taste good on a taco, speaking from accidental experience. And vanilla non-fat Greek yogurt is much sweeter than the plain, so it would totally change the taste of what you were going for. Plain non-fat Greek yogurt. The nice thing too is you can buy those in the little individual 6-ounce cups at the grocery store. So if you've never tried this before, instead of investing in a large container of a Greek yogurt like you would normally see your sour cream packaged in, you can try one of those little 6-ounce yogurt containers and use it as a topping or put a dollop on a baked potato next time you're serving them. You could also do light or low-fat sour cream. It's another good replacement too. But the plain non-fat Greek yogurt does eliminate all of the saturated fat and is a lower sodium option as well. Cheese. The recommendation for cheese is to be mindful with portions, certainly. And as Americans, I feel like cheese generally is something we can eat a lot of. Cheese is made with 2% or part skim milk. Cheese is listed as reduced fat, or alternatively, opting for a stronger flavor cheese, but using less, can all be ways to still get the taste and the texture you're looking for without all of the extra saturated fat. This last page, again, I won't talk about all of these substitutes, but when it comes to eggs, if you plan on making an omelet, egg whites or egg substitutes are a great replacement. Or maybe instead of a 2 or 3 egg omelet, you throw 1 whole egg and the rest egg whites, so you still have the taste, the color, and the texture of the yolk without all the extra saturated fat that additional yolks would provide, and instead get the fluffiness and the protein you're going to find in the egg white. But that last one on the egg substitution, the ground flaxseed or ground chia seed, humor me for a minute because this is kind of a health foodie recommendation, but it works, and it works really well in baking. You're not going to scramble up flaxseed or throw chia seed into an omelet, but the idea is that the ground version of flaxseed or chia seed, when mixed with water, works great as an egg substitute for baking. For every 1 egg your recipe calls for, a tablespoon of ground flax mixed with 3 tablespoons of water. You're going to want to mix those together in a separate bowl. Let it sit for just a couple minutes and it'll thicken up. It works great as an egg replacement. Now you're probably not needing to worry too much about the saturated fat from just a couple eggs in a whole batch of cookies or a couple eggs in a whole batch of any of your baked goods. But this does afford you the opportunity that if the price of eggs is more expensive or you'd rather use your eggs just for eating, then you have this additional substitution, which because of the flaxseed is also offering some healthy fiber and healthy fat. For the mayo, if you're using mayo as a dip, the plain non-fat Greek yogurt works awesome as a dip or a base replacement. I wouldn't spread that on the sandwich, but again, it works well as a dip or a spread. But if you want to use it as something for sandwiches, mayos that are made with olive oil would work really well, or a light mayonnaise is a good option. Alternatively, something like hummus or mashed avocado can give you similar texture that you would expect from a mayonnaise without all the saturated fat that it traditionally provides. But fat isn't the only nutrient we need to watch out for. Salt or sodium is one too. And we have an entire class dedicated to lower sodium tips, but I want to at least give us the Cliff Note version here. When at all possible, using fewer packaged or processed ingredients and cooking from scratch, that will alone significantly cut the amount of sodium in your diet. If you're going to be doing canned options, whether that be a canned vegetable or canned beans, rinse them off. 30 seconds under cold water washes 40% of the salt right down the drain. Flavoring with something other than salt, whether that be at the stove or at the table, using your herbs and spices. There's a supplemental handout we discuss in this Cut Salt Add Flavor class that gives you recommendations for how to use some of the spices that may otherwise find themselves buried or pushed to the back of your cabinets. Go in half and half, combining regular and low sodium products. A perfect example of this would be in the version of a soup. So if you want to use a carton of traditional chicken broth and then a carton of unsalted, it can be a nice way to get your taste buds adjusted to the fact that the item is going to be lower sodium without forcing them into submission and surprising those taste buds with all unsalted broth, which certainly doesn't taste the same as original. This also works well in other mixed dishes where you might be using canned items, perhaps a can of regular diced tomatoes and a can of no salt added diced tomatoes next time you're doing an Italian dish or making a sauce, if you're doing a chili. It can just be an easy way to help reduce the amount of salt and stay under the recommendation we discussed earlier. And sugar. If you don't have a salt tooth, most of us have a sweet one. So understanding how to cut down the amount of sugar to stay in the recommendation of 24 to 36 grams per day of added sugar. Remember, that's added sugar, not total, okay? Apples, they're going to have sugar in them. That's not the type of sugar I'm worried about. It's the table sugars, the honey, the agave, the nectars that you may be adding to a baked good, to a drink, or to other types of recipes that are exactly as the name implies, added sugars to that product. You can reduce the amount of sugar you're using by 1/4 to 1/3 and really not miss too much in terms of taste and texture. It's an easy way to keep things pretty standard. But you could also try a sugar substitute. Now, sugar substitutes get a pretty bad reputation, so let me clear the air on those briefly. I have quite a few listed at the bottom of the screen here. My personal favorite is stevia. It tends to have the least amount of aftertaste. You'll also see it marketed as Truvia. It can be a nice alternative that you use 1-to-1 for sugar in a recipe, and again, you won't notice a disruption in taste and texture. Splenda works well too, although many people can note the aftertaste. So if you're baking something for others or if you have sensitive taste buds yourself, you may not want to use that right away. Or you may want to consider going half and half with this as well. 1/2 cup of sugar and 1/2 cup of stevia. Or 1/2 cup of sugar and 1/2 cup of Splenda, for the 1 cup your recipe called for. But these sugar substitutes, again, the reputation I talked about, oftentimes they get picked on by the media as being unsafe or a dangerous replacement. Here's the thing. What you don't hear from the media is the amount in which the product was studied and actually did harm. So for Splenda, for example, Splenda or sucralose, it just got blown up by the media a year or two ago about being so dangerous or so unsafe, causing cancer or causing all sorts of other issues. In study subjects, they were given 78 packets a day, so the equivalent of 78 packets of Splenda a day for 2 years. And this was also done in rats, so not a human study. I mean, guys, if you're eating 78 packets of Splenda, I got some issues already. Probably really got a sweet tooth that we need to tame. It was done in the equivalent of 8 cans of sucralose sweetened beverages a day. Other diet sodas studied were done in 17 can consumption days. My goodness, if you're drinking 8 to 17 cans of that, you're probably not drinking any water. So my guess is some of these results may have been skewed by the fact that it's just an awful lot of processed sugar at the expense of probably rare, if any, water, and a lot of other lifestyle implications I think that would go along with that much diet beverage consumption. If you want to use this a cup at a time in a baked good, you're going to be fine, okay? If you want to use other spices to enhance the flavor, especially if you cut down on the amount of sugar used, something like cinnamon, powdered vanilla, nutmeg, or even your extracts like vanilla or almond can go a long way to add flavor when you're cutting down on the amount of sugar. Again, so far we've talked all about subtraction, so let's talk addition here for a minute. What is there something I could add or exchange in a recipe to increase overall nutrition? It's going to be from a fiber perspective. Remember that diets high in fiber have been associated to lower cholesterol levels. They've been linked to healthier weights. And what we also know is that traditionally foods high in fiber are rich in antioxidants and help with a whole host of health prevention strategies. So when it comes to your grains, if you're cooking up some pasta, or if you want to do a baked good and you are getting out your flour, switching to a whole grain or whole wheat version of either of these options can significantly increase your fiber. Whole wheat flour, or my favorite is the white whole wheat flour, simply an albino version of the grain, that works great in baking. Pasta, whole wheat pasta, if you've never tried it before, gosh, by the time you put sauce on it, you can hardly tell the difference. Again, if you have a picky eater that you're cooking for or eating with, then maybe go half and half. It's a half a box of regular pasta and a half a box of whole wheat. Mix them together, throw your sauce on. You're probably not going to notice too much of a difference. I've never met anybody who has complained about the number of blueberries in their blueberry muffin. Oh my gosh, there's too many in here. So add more. Add frozen or fresh fruits to your baked goods. If it calls for a half a cup, add a cup. It's not going to hurt it to have increased fiber, especially if that's something from an ingredient already called for. Oftentimes, in mixed dishes or soups, you can usually reduce the amount of meat in a recipe and increase the vegetables instead. If we're doing something like a stew, a beef stew, you can usually get by with a little bit smaller cut of meat, which is also nice from a cost savings perspective, and increase the amount of carrots or celery, potatoes that we may be using. If we're going to do a mixed dish or a casserole that is like a chicken pot pie, even though it uses white meat chicken, I'll add in an extra bag of frozen mixed vegetables, just knowing that it's going to help extend that dish. Probably give me or guarantee me some leftovers, but also add an extensive or a good amount of fiber. So speaking of those casseroles, those mixed dishes tend to be rather heavy because they often contain cream soups, cheeses, or broths, which we know are high in saturated fat, sodium, and overall calories. Experimenting with low sodium options like gravies, sauces, cheeses, increasing the vegetable content, looking at low-fat or fat-free cream soup versions, because once you add in the rest of your ingredients, a lot of times your casseroles are pretty forgiving for the changes you may be making. So we're going to take a look at a couple different recipes here. And I want to show you that in this original version of our traditional 7-layer dip, what we've got are a lot of ingredients pictured above that contribute to some pretty hefty calorie, fat, saturated fat, and sodium levels below. The saturated fat is not listed in red, but it sure should be in this example, because for individuals trying to stick to a 1,500 calorie a day diet, that is the amount of saturated fat that you're supposed to have for the entire day, okay? If we were to modify this recipe though, using reduced fat sour cream, if you want to take it a step further, go for the plain non-fat Greek yogurt for an even bigger reduction. You're going to significantly lower your calories, your total fat, your saturated fat by just the 4 substitutions bolded here. So when it comes to some of these makeovers, being intentional with how you are choosing what to modify or choosing what to make can go a long way. I want you to take a look at this ranch dip. What do you think? And the ingredients here are listed on the left. Is there anything you would change or substitute to improve the nutrition? You're welcome to jot some notes down or look at a couple ideas here. But just for the sake of time, I want to show you again in green what I changed. Instead of sour cream and mayonnaise, you could substitute both of those ingredients for the plain non-fat Greek yogurt. Don't add salt, just add pepper. And if you want to, play up the spices. Now in our house, I would probably add more garlic powder or more dill in place of the salt, because those are ingredients and seasonings that my family enjoys. But if you guys are more of a basil fan or a parsley lover, well then obviously increase the flavors of the spices you enjoy the most. Because by cutting out that salt and replacing our sour cream and mayo, look what we did in terms of a modification. In just 2 tablespoons of dip, we took the total fat from 9 grams to 0, the saturated fat 3 grams to 0, almost 50 milligrams of sodium down to less than 15. It's a pretty significant change when we're looking at such a tiny serving size. And if you plan to dip chips in this dip, well gosh, in the original, you're not going to get very many before you've already started to knock on the door of those recommendations for heart health we talked about way at the beginning. Now this casserole, this is rather lengthy in terms of the ingredients. There's a lot in here, which also means you can make a lot of changes. But something I recommend with that is only picking 1 or 2 ingredients at a time to modify, not just changing everything because you think you can or you should. So start with 1 or 2 of the following substitutions in green and make the adjustments, try it out, see what you think. If you like it, you can always make further adjustments, but if you don't like it, then you know what not to do the next time. Modification-wise, if you look at the huge changes here, calories, fat, saturated fat, sodium, again, significant changes, with also the increase in fiber being shown in this dish too. Regardless of where you start, 1 ingredient or 1 nutrient at a time. And something else I frequently remind people is don't tell your secrets when you're making a modification. If you told people that that was a low-fat chicken casserole or that you made healthy chocolate chip cookies, what's the first thing they're going to think? I don't like this. I don't want to try it. I don't think I'm going to enjoy this. If you don't tell them what you modified, chances are they're going to far more greatly enjoy it without even knowing what was done to it. If they ask for your secrets or they tell you how much you love it, then you can go ahead and toot your own horn and tell them you modified it. But otherwise, keep that to yourself. The hope is that with some simple modifications, you and those you are cooking for or eating with can all enjoy the benefits of heart-healthy eating without sacrificing taste or texture. There's an additional supplemental handout on cooking substitution, so if you haven't grabbed that already, please make sure you grab one on your way out. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.